The fish farmer didn't even bother writing a price on the board. He simply pointed toward a series of outdoor raceways shimmering beneath the morning sun. Thousands upon thousands of tiny golden fish darted through the flowing water. Healthy, fast, bright as polished coins. Margaret Hale stepped closer. Golden shiners? The farmer nodded. 18,000 of them. She looked surprised. I thought they sold easily. They usually do. Silence. But this year, everything changed. 3 large hatcheries had canceled standing orders after unusually heavy spawning produced far more bait fish than anyone expected. Now the raceways overflowed. Every extra week meant more feed, more labor, more money disappearing. The farmer sighed. If I don't move them, he looked across the tanks. I'll lose the whole batch. Nathan Hale arrived beside Margaret carrying a clipboard. He looked into the raceway. That's a lot of fish. 18,000. Nathan blinked. You serious? The farmer smiled weakly. I wish I wasn't. Margaret watched the tiny fish flash beneath the water. Healthy stock. Excellent color. Uniform size. Exactly what predators preferred. She looked back toward the farmer. What are you asking? He folded his arms. You still got those spring-fed forage ponds? I do. They're mostly empty. They are. I'll sell you every shiner for less than it cost me to feed them another week. Nathan quietly looked toward Margaret. He already recognized the expression on her face. She was thinking. That usually led somewhere interesting. He smiled. You already have an idea? Margaret nodded. I think I do. The Hale farm had never specialized in bait fish. The family raised cattle, hay, and maintained several carefully managed spring-fed ponds scattered across the property. Most people assumed the ponds existed only for livestock water. Samuel Hale knew better. When Margaret was 12, he took her to the oldest pond carrying nothing but a small dip net. He scooped dozens of tiny minnows into a white bucket. Margaret frowned. They're just little fish. Samuel smiled. No. Silence. They're the beginning of every big fish. She looked into the bucket again. They're bait. They're food. Years later, she finally understood. Healthy predator fisheries began with healthy forage fish. Without them, nothing else flourished. Back at the fish farm, workers carefully loaded oxygenated transport tanks onto Margaret's trailer. Nathan watched them work. So, he looked toward Margaret. What exactly are we doing? She smiled. Growing brood stock. Nathan raised an eyebrow. For bait. For hatcheries. The farmer overheard. He laughed politely. Hatcheries. Margaret nodded. Eventually. He didn't argue. Mostly because he assumed it would never happen. The stocking process lasted all afternoon. Thousands of golden shiners disappeared into 3 spring-fed ponds behind the Hale farm. The ponds had been prepared months earlier. Native grasses lined the banks. Aquatic plants filled the shallows. Water flowed constantly from underground limestone springs. Perfect forage habitat. Nathan watched the last transport tank empty. They're tiny. They won't stay that way. The county heard about the purchase within days. Naturally. Saturday morning found the coffee shop full. Dale Harper folded his newspaper. You hear what Margaret bought. Rick looked up. What now? 18,000 bait fish. Laughter spread across the room. Another rancher shook his head. Bait fish? Dale nodded. For those little ponds. One farmer grinned. Planning to feed every base in the county. More laughter. Margaret walked inside carrying fencing supplies. Dale waved. Morning. Morning. He smiled. So. She laughed. So. How's the bait business? They're swimming. More laughter followed. You opening a bait shop? Margaret smiled. No. What then? I don't know yet. The answer sounded familiar. She truly didn't know exactly where the opportunity would lead. She only knew healthy fish rarely stayed worthless. Back home, she treated the ponds like livestock. Water temperatures, oxygen, vegetation, spawning habitat. Everything received careful attention. Nathan found notebooks spread across the kitchen table. You're doing it again. Margaret looked up. What? The notebooks. Silence. The notebooks. They always mean another project. She smiled. They usually do. Every week, she sampled the ponds. The golden shiners adapted quickly. By early summer, schools shimmered across every shallow shoreline. Thousands of tiny spawning fish scattered adhesive eggs among underwater grasses. The fisheries biologist from the original fish farm visited in June. He slowly walked around each pond, examining vegetation, water flow, spawning beds. Finally, he smiled. I wasn't expecting this. Margaret folded her arms. What? They're reproducing. Nathan looked surprised. Already. The biologist nodded. Better than most commercial ponds. He crouched beside the shoreline. Fresh fry hovered beneath the grass. Thousands of them. Healthy. Growing rapidly. The biologist looked impressed. Your spring water stays incredibly stable. Margaret smiled. So Grandpa always said. Summer passed quietly. The ponds exploded with life. Dragonflies hovered above the reeds. Blue herons visited daily. Schools of golden shiners flashed beneath the surface like moving sunlight. Nathan tossed a handful of floating feed one evening. The water erupted. Thousands of fish surfaced simultaneously. He laughed. I've never seen anything like this. Neither had Margaret. Autumn's sampling revealed something unexpected. The original 18,000 fish had grown beautifully. But more importantly, the ponds now contained countless young-of-the-year shiners. The population had multiplied dramatically. The fisheries biologist quietly set down his sampling net. I've got a question. Margaret smiled. Go ahead. He looked across the shimmering pond. Have you ever considered selling broodstock instead of bait? Margaret looked thoughtful. I have. He nodded. I think you should. Winter arrived early. Margaret harvested only a handful of mature fish. The rest remained untouched. Neighbors questioned the decision. Dale stopped by during December. I heard you weren't selling. Margaret nodded. Not yet. You could. I know. Silence. So why wait? Margaret smiled. I'm growing something harder to replace. He looked confused. What? Genetics. Dale chuckled politely. He still didn't understand. Spring arrived with unusually heavy rains across the region. Fish hatcheries prepared for another spawning season. Then disaster struck. A viral disease swept through several commercial golden shiner operations hundreds of miles away. Entire brood populations had to be destroyed to prevent further spread. The news spread rapidly through the aquaculture industry. Healthy broodstock suddenly became extremely difficult to find. The fisheries biologist drove onto Margaret's farm without calling ahead. He climbed out of his truck carrying a folder. His expression looked unusually serious. Margaret met him beside the pond. What happened? He pointed toward thousands of healthy adult golden shiners moving through the crystal-clear spring water. Then looked back at Margaret. I've got a question. She folded her arms. Go ahead. He smiled. Do you realize you may be looking at one of the healthiest, disease-free golden shiner brood populations left anywhere in this region? The fisheries biologist stood at the edge of the pond. He watched thousands of healthy adult golden shiners glide through the crystal-clear spring water. Then he looked back at Margaret. Do you realize you may be looking at one of the healthiest, disease-free golden shiner brood populations left anywhere in this region? Margaret glanced across the water. I was hoping they'd stay healthy. The biologist smiled. They've done much more than that. Nathan folded his arms. So what happens now? The biologist answered before Margaret could. Every hatchery that lost broodstock is going to need replacement fish. He paused. And they'll need them fast. Margaret looked thoughtful. I don't want to empty the ponds. You shouldn't. The biologist nodded. Healthy genetics are worth far more than a quick harvest. That became her plan. She refused to sell every fish. Only carefully selected broodstock. The strongest. The healthiest. The fish that represented years of careful management. Nathan smiled. You've got another notebook. Margaret laughed. I've always got another notebook. Every fish sold received a record. Weight. Length. Age. Pond. Health inspection. Water temperature. Everything. Samuel's handwriting filled nearly every old notebook she inherited. One sentence appeared over and over. Protect the breeding stock and tomorrow protects itself. Margaret followed that advice exactly. The first phone call came 3 days later. Then another. Then 5 more. One hatchery manager from 2 states away sounded exhausted. Our brood ponds were wiped out. Margaret listened quietly. We heard. We've been searching everywhere. Silence. Someone told us about your ponds. Margaret agreed to meet him. The following week, 3 hatchery managers arrived together. They walked slowly around the ponds. Nobody spoke for several minutes. The water shimmered beneath the spring sunlight. Schools of mature golden shiners flashed beneath the surface like moving ribbons of gold. Finally, one manager whispered, I haven't seen brood fish this clean in months. The fisheries biologist supervised the inspection. Random health samples. Water testing. Parasite screening. Everything passed. One manager finally asked, how many are available? Margaret answered honestly, not enough for everyone. Silence settled over the group. She continued, I'll sell brood stock. But the ponds come first. Nobody argued. They understood. Healthy genetics couldn't be rushed. The first shipment left the farm before sunrise. Special oxygenated hauling tanks filled the trailer. Nathan checked every valve twice. Margaret inspected every fish personally. The hatchery manager shook her hand. You know? She smiled. What? A year ago we couldn't give these fish away. Margaret laughed softly. I remember. The truck disappeared down the highway. 2 weeks later another hatchery called. Then another. By midsummer, every healthy brood fish Margaret could responsibly spare had already been reserved. The waiting list kept growing. Saturday morning at the county diner sounded completely different. Dale Harper folded his newspaper. You hear? Rick looked up. What now? Hatcheries are driving across 3 states to buy Margaret's bait fish. One rancher laughed. Those little minnows. Dale nodded. The same ones we laughed about. Silence. I guess we were wrong. Nobody disagreed. Margaret walked inside carrying fence staples. Dale smiled. Morning. Morning. He hesitated. I've been meaning to ask. She looked amused. What? Why didn't you sell them all last year? Margaret smiled. I wasn't growing bait. He looked puzzled. What were you growing? She answered quietly. Trust. Dale thought about that answer all morning. Late summer brought another surprise. The hatcheries that purchased Margaret's brood stock began reporting exceptional spawning success. Healthy fry. Excellent hatch percentages. Strong survival rates. The original fish farmer who had sold Margaret the unwanted batch drove onto the farm one afternoon. He climbed out carrying several reports. I wanted you to see these. Margaret studied the pages. Outstanding production numbers. Healthy offspring. Minimal disease losses. The farmer laughed. You know what happened? She looked up. What? The fish everyone considered surplus became the strongest brood stock we've worked with in years. Nathan smiled. Grandpa would have liked hearing that. The farmer looked toward the ponds. I've got another question. Margaret folded her arms. Go ahead. Would you consider producing brood stock for us every year? She thought for a long moment. Finally she nodded. But carefully. Meaning, the ponds decide how much we sell. He smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. Together they developed a long-term partnership. The fish farm no longer viewed surplus golden shiners as unwanted inventory. Instead, selected groups were raised specifically for broodstock development on Margaret's spring-fed ponds. Both businesses benefited. The fish farm gained dependable genetics. Margaret received stable contracts years in advance. One autumn, the State Aquaculture Association invited Margaret to speak. She almost declined. Nathan smiled. They don't want a lecture. What then? They want your story. The conference hall filled with fish farmers, biologists, university researchers, hatchery owners. Margaret stood beside a photograph of her smallest spring-fed pond. A producer raised his hand. What special feed created these fish? Margaret smiled. No special feed. Another asked. What medication? None. Secret breeding program? She shook her head. No. The room grew quiet. Margaret pointed toward the spring bubbling from limestone beneath the pond. Healthy water. Silence. And patience. She explained how stable water temperatures reduced stress, how balanced pond ecology supported natural spawning, how protecting breeders mattered more than maximizing annual harvest. When she finished, the audience applauded. Not because she revealed a miracle, because she reminded them that careful stewardship often outperformed shortcuts. The following spring, the County Conservation District recognized the Hale Farm for sustainable aquaculture. School groups toured the ponds. Children leaned over the docks watching thousands of golden fish shimmer beneath the surface. One little girl asked, "Why are they called golden shiners?" Margaret smiled. She scooped one gently into a viewing bucket. Sunlight reflected from its bright scales. The fish glowed like polished brass. Because they remind people to look closely. The girl smiled. They're pretty. They always were. One quiet evening, Dale Harper walked beside Margaret around the ponds. Dragonflies skimmed the surface. Swallows swooped overhead. Golden shiners rippled beneath the reeds. He folded his arms. You know what still bothers me? Margaret smiled. What? I laughed. She nodded. You did. I thought you bought 18,000 bait fish. You weren't the only one. He looked across the water. You bought the future. Margaret smiled softly. No. What then? She pointed toward the spring. I bought healthy water. The setting sun turned the ponds into sheets of gold. Thousands of shiners flashed beneath the calm surface. Healthy, strong, ready for another spawning season. Margaret remembered something Samuel often said. while kneeling beside those same ponds decades earlier. The smallest creatures usually carry the biggest responsibility. She asked him what he meant. He smiled. Without forage fish. He paused. Nothing above them thrives. Standing beside the shimmering ponds years later, Margaret finally understood. The fish farm saw 18,000 surplus bait fish. The industry saw an oversupplied market. Most people saw tiny fish worth only pennies. Margaret saw tomorrow's brood stocks swimming inside healthy spring water. She never expected disease to sweep through commercial hatcheries. She never planned for hatcheries to compete for her fish. She simply recognized that healthy genetics, protected carefully, become more valuable with time. By the time the next spawning season arrived, the little golden shiners nobody wanted had rebuilt hatchery breeding programs across the region. And once again, the greatest opportunity on Margaret Hale's farm wasn't created by luck. It came from seeing lasting value in something everyone else had already decided was worth almost nothing.